Welcome everybody to our latest webinar in the series of webinars that we're doing over the last year and into 2016. I'm thoroughly excited that we've got such a huge turnout tonight. This is just tremendous, and it just shows to me the fact that we've really hit a nerve with the topic that we've got on tonight, and we're excited to have Professor David Clutterbuck joining us as well for the event. As we get into as we just get into the webinar, I just want to set the scene a little bit for you with a little bit about ourselves as WWA Corporate Coaching. And first of all, just to let you know that the webinar that we're doing tonight is one of a series. We've worked with David before, but David is not the only individual that we are bringing in to work with us in the webinars that we're setting up. All of these webinars are aimed at leadership development and coaching topics. We are hungry to find top speakers for you and individuals that are ready and interested to come and serve the Middle East professionals, the coaching professionals, the HR professionals, the OD professionals that are looking and ready for this type of information, because we ourselves are as hungry as you are, and we love speaking to these experts. If you're not already on our list, naturally, then you can also get hold of us, or we can get on the list through our website. You see the address there. Or you can also send an email to Ingrid in our office.
Okay.
And
I think we might be getting somewhere.
Okay. So I think. David,
hello there, Nick.
Yes, David.
I am here. Hey.
Excellent. Fine.
Brilliant.
So we're just doing a short introduction. I'm so glad that you have finally joined us, and
yes,
we're going to get to you. No problem at all. We're going to get to you very shortly.
Excellent.
Fantastic. So just a little bit about ourselves. We are the largest and most established coaching company in the Middle East. We have been around since 2004. Even when I see that date, I'm surprised myself, because when we started talking about coaching all those years ago, everybody thought we were a little bit crazy, a little bit before our time. But thankfully, we were before our time. But now is our time. We have over 35 professional certified coaches that we personally select and use with our clients. We're aligned with the International Coach Federation, very important part of what we do in terms of our ethical standards and our general delivery standards. And we cover the Middle East region and the North Africa region. So we're very specific in the region that we're handling. What do we do? Well, for those that don't know us, we work in the coaching field extensively. We work with executive and leadership performance coaching, a lot of one-on-one stuff, working with senior level individuals around the region, and we're privileged to work with some really amazing clients. We also work with leadership teams, and we get a chance to actually do some team coaching. So, again, this is building on the stuff we're already doing, and David's going to bring in some fresh perspectives for us tonight. Then we also work with coaching cultures, and we take organizations on that bigger culture journey that is critical in organizations really leaning into coaching and using it to the maximum benefit for the present and the future. And we also deliver programs around coaching skills for leaders and for managers. So I'm going to really hand over to David. Before I do that, I just want to give him a quick introduction, because I've known David now for several years, and in fact I met him at a coaching conference that we were both presenting at, and firstly we struck up a friendship straight away, and And secondly, over the time that I've known David, truly, it's interesting the people that note that they know him. And even today, I had an experience that was put a smile on my face because somebody was telling me that they were out there speaking to a number of coaches, and they'd mentioned about this webinar. And when they mentioned the name Professor David Clutterbuck, the coach piped up and said, "My goodness, I knew that name 15 years ago when I was going through my training." So, so it's not that you're old, David, but it shows to me that you have a tremendous history here with the coaching community, and I'm very excited to have you here with us tonight.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Nick. Okay. Shall I get started?
Please do, David. The floor is yours.
Okay. Brilliant. So I'm hoping that my slides will just work, or are you going to do the slides on for me?
I'll do the slides for you if you prefer.
That will probably be easiest, yeah. Okay, so we've called this the elusive high-performing team because it's actually quite difficult to find high-performing teams. Even within the same one organization, I'm working with an American multinational at the moment, trying to identify what makes the difference between their highest performing teams and other teams. And it tends to be a bit arbitrary as to how we decide what is a high-performing team, and this is not the place to go into how we've done that. But I think there are big issues around that. So when we look at high-performing teams, we're into a sort of area of a lot of it is judgment and subjectivity. But let's look at the next slide, the first slide, which is what we'll cover today. We certainly need teams for all sorts of things, and we know way back in our anthropological past that one of the reasons that we were able to outcompete Neanderthal man and other sources of competing sapiens was the fact that we actually work in larger teams and more closely in teams. We were more effective team workers. And there's been massive research around what makes teams themselves effective, but again, it's culturally variable. It's variable according to the purpose of team and according to a whole lot of different contextual factors. So we're going to try and look at what a high-performing team looks like, the importance of being a learning team, and the growing importance of team coaching is the core of what we're going to be doing. So the other three are just sort of introduction. So if we look at some of the problems on the next slide, with what actually is the problem with teams. All teams need, all businesses need teams, and they have teams of various sizes and of various scope. We know that from research done over 100 years ago that generally speaking, that teams, as they increase in size, decrease in effectiveness because of something called social loafing. People put in less effort as the team gets bigger. Although the organisation I'm working with at the moment has found an interesting answer to that, because they actually have teams of up to 40 people who they then encourage to break into and create smaller sub-teams, which are constantly making and remaking, and these small sub-teams operate at the level of highest performance. So and there are lots of interesting things coming out of various bits of research at the moment. But teams don't really deliver what they're supposed to. Very often, because they aren't really teams. We talk about top teams where actually everybody's in competition with each other. They've all got their own agendas. They operate in silos, and they might meet again occasionally to share some information and make really big decisions, but they're not really teams. We find that teams don't meet their potential because they become static. That they don't evolve with their environment. We looked at what happened with team building at one point and found that if you got a team to really gel together, what actually happened was they created a wall against newcomers. And what actually happened is as the people left the team and it shrank, that wall got thicker and thicker until eventually you often had to disband that team because it was just becoming totally dysfunctional both internally and externally. And this potential to work together is often not realised. We find many teams filled with high-performing individuals, but the overall performance of the team isn't really what's needed. And so that's where team coaching comes in many cases. It actually addresses these issues. But let's look at what we mean by high performing. So let's look at the next slide. So here's just some of the ways that people have described high performing teams, from delivering the short-term numbers, working with everybody at their maximum capacity, so the high performance of everybody, delivers more collectively than separately, but nobody actually defines what that actually should look like in terms of volume, has a positive impact beyond the team boundaries, creates the potential for its own growth and future achievement, creates the potential for growth in the systems of which it's a part. That's another way it's been defined. Or do we mean high performing both in what it delivers and how it delivers things? Because you could be high performing in one direction on what you're measured on, but actually be leaving chaos behind you in other directions. It's almost impossible to define what we really mean by high performing. So what we've tried to do in terms of our work around high performing teams is to step away from the outputs to some extent, although those are obviously critical, and to look at the way that it works. And so it's the second of these, how it delivers. And if we look at the next slide, this is a suggested definition that we have that's been quite helpful in many contexts. So a high-performing team is one that understands and reacts dynamically and effectively to both its internal and external contexts. And what we mean by that is it understands enough of what's going on internally to manage the relationships with people and the supportiveness between people to maximum effect wherever it can. But also it interacts very well with its external context, the environment around it, the people, its constituents, its stakeholders, and so forth. And it responds to the environment and changes with its environment. And this is it's a useful catch-all description, if you like, of a high-performing team. Still doesn't make it very easy to identify what is a high-performing team. We have no clear measures or single measure for these concepts. So work that has been done, Katzenberg, for example, and his colleagues, John Katzenberg rather, looked in the next slide at some of the conditions for a high-performing team, and this is what he came out with. That it's a real team, that people know who's in it. It's got a compelling direction, so people know why they're in the team and what the team is supposed to be doing. It's got the right people in it. It's got a solid team structure. And that's not just the hierarchy chart. It's about what you're trying to do. It's about being of the right size. It's about having ways of working together. It's in a supportive organizational context. So if the team is not supported by the environment around it, it's probably not going to be high performing either. And then it's got the last thing that he found was, and this has been replicated in a number of studies, is competent team coaching or a coaching environment within the team. So all of those things make a lot of sense. But they don't necessarily deliver. Again, they don't help us to actually to change the way that a team works very easily. When we look at at the concept of learning within teams, that gives us a different perspective. So, if a team needs to constantly react with its environment and change internally and externally, it has to learn and be constantly learning. And so, in a study that we did over 16 years ago now of teams across Europe, we looked at how different teams manage their learning, and we defined a learning team as we've done it here, a group of people with a shared purpose who take responsibility for developing each other and themselves. And so this is not the definition of a high-performing team, it's just one of the facets that we've been able to identify. That is, teams that are going to be high-performing have to be high learning as well. And so if we start by looking at the way that the team learns, we have a greater capacity for making change happen that will enable that team to ultimately become high performing. It doesn't necessarily mean that a team that learns well is automatically going to be a high performing team. Those other Katzenberg factors can get in the way, but nonetheless we're creating the first foundation stone for a team to become high performing. And so if we try and look at what actually makes a team as opposed to just a group of people, we get into other definitional problems as well. Peter Hawkins, a good friend of mine, has on the next slide, has 3 critical questions, which I find very useful. So if you are a team, there are things you can do together that you can't do as well apart. His second question is, what do we need or what do we want to achieve that requires us to be more than the sum of our parts? So what can we achieve that actually we couldn't do on our own? And what's the nature of our independency? What is it that we do that requires us to work together or collaboratively to achieve our goals? And there may be other questions that could be added to these, but these seem to be the 3 core teams that we would focus on. Let's look at the next slide here. Here we are. Can we move on from this one? We seem to have duplicated that one. Yeah. Here we're looking at the work that came out of the studies that we did back in 1999. What we looked at was the way that the teams worked, and we found that the team membership and the way the teams learned was very much dependent upon the context in which the team worked. And so if we bring up if we just press the buttons a couple of times, bring up the actual text within the box, you'll see that the first team that comes up is and there's one more, I think. The first team that comes up is the stable team. The stable team is one where basically you do the same work with the same people over an extended period of time. That's great for getting for learning from each other and for developing really consistent processes. And quality processes tend to be associated with stable teams. However, from a learning perspective, you've not got many stimuli. And in fact, most of the stimuli for learning happen when change is forced on the team or when you get new members into the team. One of the companies I'm working with at the moment has a process whereby it actually welcomes new members by celebrating the new learning that they bring to the team. In another team, we have something in other teams, we've just got something called banana memos, where newcomers actually spend time questioning, why do we do it this way? Why don't we do that? And their questions, their naive questions, have to be taken seriously and discussed by the team. On the other side, we've got cabin crew. Cabin crew, you've got a lot of different people to learn from, but only a short period in which to learn from them because you move on. The same phenomenon you would see in rugby, in sort of barbarian rugby teams, or in orchestras that are put together, or actors and actresses in a film or a theatre. You get only a limited amount of time to learn from these people, but because of the variety, you get a higher amount of or higher potential from learning because there's so many people you can learn from. The developmental alliance is any kind of team that's set up specifically for learning, like an action learning set or a mentoring relationship. A HIT team is where you have lots of people. You have a group of people who are together, who know each other very well, but they get given lots and lots of different tasks to do. And so they would typically be given, be asked to evolve in the way that they work, and picking up project after project, each one of which would be different. An evolutionary team brings all these things together. Basically, an evolutionary team is one where both the task changes and the membership changes. And one of my favorite examples of this is an organization where we had it was basically this was a factory or a warehouse in the UK, and what happened in this warehouse was they had decided they would make it an exemplar of empowerment, and so the top team had been there right from the start. And then they brought in a bunch of people who had been tested for empowerability, but through some psychometric. And then the last people they brought in was the junior and middle managers. And the trade union was agreed not to unionize the workers there to see what would happen within the experiment. After 11 months, all but one of the staff said they wanted to be unionized. They were so upset and unhappy. And so when we looked into this, what we found was the problem that happened was people had there was no handover between the stages of this team. The guys at the top thought that they knew what empowerment looked like, and they had a vision for what was happening. The people who'd come in at the bottom had their own views, which partly coincided. But the guys who came at the end, the managers, thought this was a terrible thing and had no idea what empowerment was, and thought that they were being constantly undermined by decisions being made by other people. And particularly one of them said to me, this is terrible. My team had a meeting without telling me. How dare they do that? So what we introduced was a concept called retro-engineered learning, where you put members of the different teams together and you ask them gradually to tell the story of the learning of how the team went from one stage to the next. And the way that we typically do it is we ask the person who was there from the beginning to paint the picture, and then we ask the person who's just arrived to say, or not been there a long time, say, what would you have done in those circumstances? And then one by one we would go backwards and forwards over this in small bites until both parts, till the old timers have really explained the story of how the team evolved, the way its thinking patterns evolved, and its aspirations evolved, and the newcomers have got to understand this and are able to put it into context. So it's a typical team coaching approach. We also found in our study of learning teams that there were various characteristics or ways, things that they did. If you look at the next slide, you can see that all of the teams had a common sense of purpose and a common sense of priorities. Those two don't always come together. In fact, we see working with charities in particular, we find there's often a divergence amongst teams between what the common sense of purpose, which tends to be quite clear, and the common sense of priorities, which doesn't. But all of these other factors, the willingness to speak openly, being aware of each other's strengths and weaknesses, valuing difference as a driver of the team, willingness to share knowledge and expertise, these are all important factors, and so are the others. Knowing how each other thinks, learning how each other thinks is important. Trusting each other's ability and goodwill. And this last one, generating the buzz, we actually found there were two factors in relating to this. Fizz is the enjoyment you get from the work you do. Buzz is the enjoyment from the company that you keep, the people who you work with. And what we found in learning teams, there was a high level of all of these 8 characteristics, or 9 characteristics rather. And so this is, and we think, is an important part of the whole process. If you want a team to become a high-performing team, you have to first set out to make it into a learning team. So let's look at team coaching. Here's another definition on the next slide. So this is the way we describe it. It's the dialogue that helps teams better understand their internal and external context, and hence create and maintain effective processes for leveraging that understanding to produce sustainable high performance. So here we're making the link very clearly with high performance and team coaching. The aim of team coaching is basically to help the team be able to not only achieve high performance but sustain it from its own resources. And indeed, part of the role of the team coach is to make themselves as obsolete as quickly as possible. Here's a couple of additional ways of expressing this. Pretty much the same thing on the next slide. And you can see here, Peter Hawkins is adding to the issue of helping them improve performance by helping them to function more than the sum of its parts. And he's talking about clarifying its mission, improving its internal relationships. So he's putting much more emphasis on the systems. And I think both of these, whichever definition works for you, then I think that's important to actually go with the definition that works for you in your organization or in your coaching practice. We need, I think, very clearly to make the case for team coaching because it's still not clearly been made. And when we find on the next slide that it works, we see that team coaching is actually used most effectively either to improve some aspect of performance that's been identified as getting in the way of achieving the aspirations of the team or the organization, or it's to get things happening faster. And so typically, particularly when you're setting up a new team, project team to achieve or to manage a new project, or it's a startup, or anything that where actually speed is important. Team coaching can speed things up dramatically. Now, we don't have statistics on this. We have lots and lots of anecdotal evidence, however. And then, of course, to make things happen differently. If you want to change the culture of your team, then team coaching is is a significant way of doing it. It provides that external reference that helps the team to focus on how it's going to be consistent in changing, for example, behaviors or thinking patterns. But it's a big step for somebody to go from one-to-one coaching to team coaching, as the next slide shows. And here we have just 3 of the critical issues. One of the issues is the issue of confidentiality. There are things you would say in a one-to-one coaching relationship which you couldn't possibly say or wouldn't want to say in front of the whole team. And so, the team coach will undoubtedly have a whole lot of information which he or she will not want to reveal, but they'll know more that they're able to say, basically. So that needs to be managed very carefully. The relationships scope, this same issue. There are some issues that are relevant just to the individual in the team, but to their particular role, or to 1 or 2 people within the team, but aren't actually relevant for the team as a whole. So team coaching has to focus on things that affect everybody. Now, sometimes we find that what we think doesn't affect is only something for one person, actually is something for everybody. So in one team I was working with coaching a while ago, we found that they had all asked to spend time discussing how one of them dealt with a sociopath in their team. And it was just this one team, or one person with a member of the executive team with a sociopath as a direct report. But they took the view that this problem was something that would affect morale across the organisation much more widely than that team if it was not dealt with, but also that this was an opportunity for the team itself to learn how to actually recognise and deal more efficiently with such people as when they encounter them in the future. And so they took a collective responsibility for it. So I think this issue of relationships is about where do we want to take collective responsibility. And how you reach decisions and decision quality. When you're working with somebody one-to-one, it's relatively easy to get, to help them to know when is it time to say, okay, so what are you going to do about that? Or is your decision this? But when you're working with a bunch of people, with a team, people come to conclusions about what's right or when it's time to move on at different speeds. And so one of the things that we do frequently as team coaches is to say, okay, let's recognize when the team is actually moving, or parts of the team are moving at different speeds on something. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, one of the tools and techniques that we use very, very frequently is to say, okay, we see that some of you think that the solution is this, and some of you are really not convinced about that. So we're going to break you into 2. And those members of the team who are really sort of gung-ho and think, right, we sorted this one, we'd like you to go away in another room and think about everything that could go wrong, all the negatives that might happen about this. And then we're going to bring you back together in about half an hour. And so they go off and do this, meanwhile, taking the pressure off those who remain in the room. And the team coach can work with those who remain in the room, helping them to actually work through what their thoughts are. And so when you bring them back together, almost invariably they have come to a much closer place because they've been able to debate separately. And indeed, one of the things that we frequently find is that team coaching frequently works best when you have 2 team coaches, so that you can actually have a team coach working with both sides. So what do team coaches do? Well, here are some of the core roles on the next slide. They help, for a start, the team define what it's there for and what its purposes are. As we saw in the learning team, the 2 key things in the diagram. They help their team really get to grips with what's going on around it. Very often, teams think they understand the environment, but they have very poor data on which to work. They help the team to identify what's getting in the way of it performing as well as it would aspire to. And frequently people just don't know, or they make assumptions about it. And having identified that, then they can think about what they do about it. Then they help build a team learning plan. Now, a team learning plan, I think, is something that's fundamental in terms of aggregating the knowledge or the aspirations for learning of individuals with the aspirations for learning as a team. So what does this team have to be better at over the next 12 months? And how are we collectively going to support each other in making that happen? I think also it's important for team coaches to help the team and its leader to become more confident in themselves, and to help the team become more confident in the leader as a leader. Now, this isn't always possible, and sometimes one of the reasons you would step out of a team coaching or not take on a team coaching assignment is because the leader is not actually capable of leading. But that's one of the reasons why in team coaching we tend to spend a lot more time thinking through and doing due diligence on the team before we even start the team coaching process. And of course, the last thing we do is to enable them to take coaching internally and to develop a coaching climate inside the team so they don't need this external support anymore, or need much less of it anyway. So when we're looking at the diagnosis of a team, the first stage, on the next slide, we help them to think about, firstly, does an issue need attention? If the team hasn't recognized that something's a problem, they're not going to want to spend time on it. There's always got other things to take their attention. But recognizing it needs attention, then gathering the data, then sensing the patterns that are going on. What's actually happening here that we're not noticing? What's the meaning that we take from those patterns? And based upon that, what could we change if we wanted to? And creating the impetus for change, what do we want to change? And how are we going to do that? And where are the resources going to come from in order to make those changes happen? So the diagnosis phase is really about determining what do we want to work on and how are we going to do it. So there's a lot of contracting there going on. Then on the next slide, we look at the dynamics. How does the team work together? And what we find is that these dynamic forces, some of them are internal, some of them are external, but basically is what actually affects the way that people relate to each other, the way they behave, and their performance. Most teams don't have much idea of what those dynamics are. And so helping the team just understand itself a bit more is one of the first jobs of a team coach. Then we look at just one of the ways that we get at this. We help the team to think about questions like the ones on the next slide. And these are just a sample of the kind of questions we might ask. So does the team know what its strengths and weaknesses are? Just the ordinary SWOT analysis, it might be helpful, but there are lots of other ways in which we can get under the surface of this and help people understand, when do things really work well for us and when do they not? When do we have greatest confidence in ourselves and when not? Is the team managing conflict properly? Because some conflict is positive. Does it understand its collective and individual weaknesses and strengths? Does it, and this one, most important one, does it have a collective will to achieve? Very often we find that actually when we ask that question individually of people, they will say no. If we ask them collectively, of course, they'll all try and say yes. We ask them individually, and there's a very different answer. I mean, we very often look at the collective responses to questions and questionnaires that we put in, or questions that we ask, and the individual responses. And do the teams or the goals of the team and the goals of the coachees within it actually align? Is there alignment between the values of the team and the values of the manager? Very often the team may have a very different set of ways of thinking about things than the manager does. And does this team have the capacity for open discussion? Or to put it another way, has it got a high degree of psychological safety? Again, very often we find we've got to work on these things, and the team coach starts off as one of the first tasks of helping people trust each other more. And that can take quite some time, and it requires a lot of leadership from the leader in terms of being vulnerable and being open, and recognizing that people would have good reason not to trust a leader until proven otherwise. So how do we do all this? Well, we work on a whole range of different things, and these are just some of them. And I'll deal with some of them as we go. Conflict resolution we've already touched on. I'm going to give you a technique for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about team communication. We've talked about quality decision making already. We've helped the team think about its time orientation. That's an interesting one, because basically we find that teams tend to have a mindset that either is highly future-oriented, or past-oriented, or present-oriented. You may have a little variation in near future-oriented, but looking at where the team's attention is actually can help you identify and diagnose a lot of the issues that they're having with achieving achieving their goals. We need a mixture of those four time focuses. What's the right mixture for that particular one? Then we've got the issues of collective creativity as well. How do you actually allow the team to be creative? So if we just look at one of these issues, which I think which really is about conflict, and we find that if we start with the team on the next slide, people actually have different levels of comfort and discomfort with being there in a team and with addressing issues. As a team coach, you end up creating a certain level of discomfort and conflict potential simply because you are revealing things or helping people to discuss things which they would much rather not, or have been avoiding discussing. And so working with you, where do people feel individually comfortable and as a group comfortable? Where do they feel individual discomfort and group discomfort? We might explore these issues with them as a precursor to actually saying, okay, the things that we feel most discomfort about are probably the areas where we have greatest need to address in terms of improving performance. The things that we have greatest comfort about are probably the ones where we are questioning less, and we may want to look at it in a different way. I know there's some questions coming up, and I can only partially see them under my screen, so I'm going to come back to them in a minute, if I may. Then we also look at the issue of internal conflict within the team itself. And so what we find on the next slide is that we've got a conflict matrix coming out here, where basically the individual members of the team are almost invariably conflicted, for examples in their own values and how they live those out in the work they do. The team may have conflict between its members, and the coach comes into the picture and becomes another focus for conflict. And indeed, one of the problems that coaches experience, or team coaches experience, is that the team sees the team coach as a resource which they can use to blame for everything. And inexperienced team coaches very quickly get trapped into becoming the scapegoat for the team's inability to be self-honest. And so one of the critical questions that the team coaches that we constantly do is we point out conflict as we see it emerging within the team or within individuals, and then we say, do you recognize that? And if you do, what would you like to deal with it? And part of the process of team coaching is constantly be pushing the responsibility back on the team. We have techniques for looking at team coaching. They're very similar to techniques from arbitration and from mediation, and one of those is fault-free conflict analysis on the next slide, where we're essentially trying to bring two parties together who are in conflict or potential conflict. But firstly, we get them to actually recognize and acknowledge what the other party is doing that's positive, or that they value in the other party. And then we get them to talk about what's going on from a task point of view, but without emotion as much as possible, and without blame. So what I'm trying to achieve and what I'm having difficulty doing, and what problems are resulting for other people. And so it's not you're not doing this, so it's this is what's happening. And then the emotional analysis comes to the next bit: how I want to feel, how I do feel, and what's making me feel this way. And notice it's not who's making me feel this way, it's the fact that I'm not getting the information in time is making me feel this way. Now, and so the blame is on the process as opposed to the individuals involved. And then both parties take responsibility for generating solutions. Now, you might go around several times in the cycle of this, but it's a fairly well-proven approach to actually helping to deal with conflict as it emerges, or even even once it has emerged to become a big issue. Then in the last few things that I'm going to offer you, some team communication tends to be of three. The next slide tends to have three basic kinds. So we find that the team needs help getting a balance between the communication that relates to planning ahead, the strategic communication, and that involves a lot more with talking with other people. How it manages the interdependencies between people, so the coordinating internally and externally. And the autonomous communication, so how you actually share information with other people, how you learn together. And then the team coach may also sit in on the team meetings, its normal team meetings, and actually look at how they work, and help the team develop new processes that actually make their team meetings more quicker and more effective. And so we talk about on the next slide transforming team meetings. Sorry, I missed a slide there. I'll come back to that in a second. So we also talk about goal alignment as well. Let's do that one first. Okay, we'll do the goal alignment. Sorry, my fault. We help the team work out what it wants and why. And as you can see, you've got this matrix that we work with, where if you've got high alignment on how to achieve goals and high alignment on what you want as goals, then that's when you get collective high performance, and conflict is positive. Whereas if you've got in any of the other three quadrants, actually conflict is going to be negative, or you're just not going to get that high performance that you need. And so working on what we want to achieve and how we're going to achieve it, that's again one of the first things that team coaches clarify, making sure that everybody is on exactly the same page of what the team is there for and how it's going to achieve its goals. Then, finally getting to the transforming team meetings, what we would typically try and look at is what's the agenda like. Most team meetings tend to have agendas full of waffle and stuff up the front that could have been done in an email beforehand. You don't need apologies for absence or any of that kind of stuff. A simple technique is to take each agenda and to score it with 10 points, or up to 10 points, 1 to 10 points in terms of urgency, and 1 to 20 in terms of importance. And then you multiply the two scores. And then the two scores, the resulting score tells you which items should come first, and the highest scoring items come first. That way, the energy that you've got is used much more effectively. And indeed, what research tells us is we have about 45 minutes in a meeting when we're at our maximum level of energy, and after that, our ability to make good decisions starts to decline quite rapidly. So those are some of the things we would do. We also have lots of techniques for looking at the quality of the dialogue that you have in the team meeting. How could that be improved? One simple technique we use is to ask people before they start any discussion to say, what do you want to think about, what they want to achieve, what they want to hear, and what they want to say in the discussion. And when people actually think about those things before they start the discussion, and they share those with everybody else before they start the discussion, you get a much, much better dialogue, you get much clearer decisions which aren't being made later, much more respect from everybody around the table, and it takes about half the time. So these are just one of the practical tools that we have. So if we summarize the team coaching process as on the next slide, what we've got here basically is a 9-step process where we start off by helping people contract, both with the coach but also to each other, about how they're going to make the team coaching process work. We set a broad overarching goal for the team coaching. How does this team want to be different? Then we define the specific issues that we want to talk about and why they're important right now. Then we get the team to understand what's going on from a systemic perspective. That typically leads you to coming back together and saying, actually, that the problem is different from what we thought. So the redefinition approach is really important. Then you can start to get this collective mind shift about how an individual mind shift about how you work differently. That leads you to different ways of working forward, different decisions. And sometimes that means you put things off because this is not ready, you don't have the information to decide. And then the recontracting is, okay, how do we want to work differently? What do we learn from the coaching process that we can apply in the way that we work together over the coming months? And to summarize it all, I guess, last slide. So I think the first one is for me on the next slide is one of the most important.
Right, David, we seem to be losing you for a moment there. David?
Hello?
Yes. Are you with us still? Great.
Hello?
We lost you for a moment there.
Sorry? Yeah. Okay. Can we go on to the last slide, Nick?
Certainly.
Yeah, here we go. So this first, whoops, no, the last one. Yeah, sorry. Just before this, there we go. What did you do collectively as a team this week that did or didn't meet your collective ideal? I think that's a fundamental question. What do you do collectively this week that took you substantially towards achieving a key team goal? How do you score individually and as a team in terms of self-honesty? And then those would be the three key questions I would ask. But you then could have questions like, what's the personality of this team? How is leadership distributed? And many, many more. The key role of the coach, of course, is to ask the questions that help the team to think about the way it performs and how it could perform better in achieving the goals that it has. So that's the slideshow. And we've got some time to react to some of the questions. I see two.
So, David, do you want me to read those out? Because I'm not sure everybody's able to see them. So I'll post them, and then maybe you'll give us your views and responses to those. The first one I have here is David. How do you quickly make yourself obsolete as a coach if there is a lot of technical information to learn and the teams aren't taking responsibility for their learning?
Okay. Well, I think you would, for a start, make a decision as to whether or not team coaching is appropriate for that team. Because if the technical learning is by the coach, then I think that, well, you might want to do that, but this is really technical. If a team is going to learn a lot of technical stuff, it has to do it itself. The coach, it's a different kind of coaching. That's instruction, maybe. So I wouldn't call it real coaching. But if you get the team, what you can do is to talk about, in those circumstances, to talk about the team. What is it that they don't know, and how are they going to find out? So rather than give them lots of information, give them the questions and the sources by which they might find the answers, and then get them to go off and actually look at those and to share the learning. One of the things that we frequently do with teams is actually sit down with them and say, okay, let's define the learning you need to that needs to happen. How are you going to go out and get this, and how are you going to share it with each other? And so people take responsibility for a section of learning, and they go away, they do the research, and they come back, and they present it, and then everybody discusses it.
Okay, fantastic. Next question. What if the conflict is more about, I'm assuming that there is conflict in the team. What is it if the conflict is more about behaviors?
Well, I think the same process that seems to work quite well. In fact, it works particularly well if it's about behaviors, because what we tend to either get very angry about somebody else's behavior and be very accusative, or we tend to try and soft pedal it and not actually give them accurate feedback. And so we can add to the process the whole concept of impact versus intent. And so as part of the process, the coach would ask, when you're approaching this particular this process or the relationship with this other team or with whoever, what's your intent, and what do you think the impact is, having observed the way that they respond? And so so you start by looking at impact versus intent. You start to deconstruct and say, and the other person can say, well, actually, my intent was to actually be helpful and give them some information, whereas I can see now the impact is they're just feeling I'm looking over their shoulder all the time.
Okay. David, we've lost you again.
No, I'm still here.
Great, excellent. Okay, next question. Would you use a diagnostic tool such as Leadership Circle, for example?
Absolutely. The biggest danger we have, though, is over-diagnosing. We can use, I would typically advise using one or two tools up front to get to understand the team in some depth. And then I would use other tools as we begin to address specific issues. So if, for example, you found that there was a lot of that there was conflict in the team, you might want to look at using an emotional intelligence questionnaire or an MBTI or something like that to actually so that people understood the difference. But I wouldn't start running. I would never use those kinds of tools up front. Because you're automatically making assumptions about what's wrong with the team or what the priority of the team is, and you don't know that yet.
Okay, great. Next question is, what is the most important factor in building a team? Is it culture or is it a common goal clarity?
It's not. There is no one factor. I mean, if there was, it would be so simple, wouldn't it? I think that all of the factors that John Katzenberg identified and many others that we found seem to be are important. I mean, one that's not in Katzenberg's list and which came out of our studies was the willingness of people to actually put aside their own priorities for the team's priorities. And so that for me is fundamental to any high-performing team, or indeed any functioning team. And so I don't think we can answer that question at all. It's really, there is a multiplicity of factors, and indeed in the research we're doing in high-performance teams in the particular company at the moment, what we're identifying is that the many of the factors that typify the high-performing teams are simply factors within the culture of that organization, which they are exemplifying to a much higher degree than other teams. And so an example would be the company has a strong value in terms of really investing in making sure it gets the right people into the team, and it won't hire people unless they really, really fit. Even if there's a desperate need for work is not being done, they won't hire people unless they're really going to fit the team. Now, the highest performing teams that we've been able to identify did put far, far more emphasis on that than did other teams. So I think it's really it's a matter of degree, I guess.
Okay.
The other factor is that we've also observed that many teams have a sort of a secret ingredient. There is something that makes them special, and it can be almost anything from the character, from the amount of fun that they try and have, as in some teams, to having some special combinations of knowledge. So the secret ingredient is another big factor.
Great. Excellent. I'm going to race into some other questions, David, because I know we're short on time. Here's another one. Should a coach working within an executive team on individual coaching play a role as a team coach as well, or is there a conflict of interest?
The simple answer is the jury's out on that one. People have taken different perspectives on this. I've seen it work well, and I've seen it work badly. And we honestly don't know. I mean, it has the potential to have real conflict, and it also has the potential to add real value. I think where it's worked well, it has been in teams where there's been a high level of psychological safety. Where it's bombed quite badly has been where the team does not have a high level of interpersonal trust.
Good, excellent. In a multicultural environment where dealing with different cultures, nationality, and traditions, how can you adapt the knowledge and the models that you've discussed?
Well, the interesting thing is that actually, by taking a coaching mindset, we demonstrate an interest in other people, in the diversity of perspectives and opinions that people within the team have, and we will also develop. We have a humility towards our own perspectives, and so what it actually does is make it so much easier to work across cultures. And we've seen a few examples where we've had companies with different cultures merge, and the teams have got along together or managed to become much more effective simply by the team coaching process, helping them to appreciate what the other side brings and to value those traditions even if they're different.
Excellent. Okay. I've got a question here about different coaching models. So what sort of systems or team coaching methodologies are there out there? They mention organizational relationship and systems coaching, which is quite a well-known model here. So I just wondered, and the sort of back up to that is what might be advantages or disadvantages?
I think we have, it's very easy as coaches to get stuck with a particular model and a particular process, and that's fine as long as the needs of the team actually fit that process. But as we increasingly find, the more that when coaches get stuck with a particular model and use that as the way that they do their coaching, whether it's individual coaching or team coaching, they limit their advancement as a coach. And so it's fine to have a broad approach. But it's better to have a number of broad approaches and to work between those, really responsive to and very different needs of each team. So nothing wrong with any of these. Give this to people at the beginning of a program, as long as one recognises you are actually limiting your ability to understand what's going on in that team and to really help that team. If you say, I'm open to this, I'm always open to checking whether that's really appropriate, I think that's much healthier.
Okay, we got snippets of that answer. I'm afraid you were faded in and out a little bit, but hopefully we got what we needed. I think a couple more questions, and then we'll close up.
Shall I repeat it?
I think we caught most of it, so I'll move on to the next questions. How do you support a team coach who blocks the integration of newcomers? Sorry, a team. How do you support a team who blocks the integration of newcomers?
I think, again, this is one of the cases where you would call the issue and ask the team, what are you going to do about it? And if the team does not want to do anything about it, then you would call into question whether you want to coach them. Like as with individual coaching, that there's got to be a willingness and energy for addressing the issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Got a great question here. What was your biggest challenge with the team, and how did you resolve this?
Oh dear, yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges for me was finding that this was very early on, and this we're going back 20 years now, and I was working with a team, and they had a very weak chief executive. And reporting into him was two deputy chief executives, a Dutch one and an English one, and they both. They both exposed. There was total conflict, the war between them, and they actually had a big table, such a big table, so that they couldn't actually hit each other when they stood up and shouted at each other across the table. The board meetings were a complete fiasco, and what we did was was observe. We gave some feedback, and then we asked the question, "What do you want to do about this?" And we never got an answer. And a couple of months later, the chief executive was removed, and so were the two deputy chief executives. So maybe we did have an impact in our report, but this was an uncoachable team.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. Is that I guess you can only take the team where it's prepared, or at least if it's open to explore the opportunities of going somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested, we have got a little handout we can pass on to participants. It's called "When Not to Coach a Team."
That would be great, and we can get that out to everybody via email. David, thank you very much. That's it for the questions. I think this is probably a great way to close off. David, I really want to thank you for your time and your input. It's really
And you
interesting
must
to
be
hear.
very relieved that we had actually made it. Yes.
Yes, and for those who don't know, David he's in Budapest, and it was a little bit touch and go whether we could get him online, but thankfully we did. But no, thank you for your input on team coaching. It's really interesting to hear your view and get another perspective on team coaching. And I think you're absolutely right. Just using one tool alone and focusing in on that is probably not the best way to move forward and perfect your ability working with teams. So thank you so much for your time, David. Thank you all the audience. And by the way, the recording will come out to you in the next couple of days. That's automated out to you because you've registered. And please keep an eye open for our future webinars. We're trying to knock one out roughly once a month. And we've got some other exciting people that we're in conversation with right now. So keep your eyes peeled for those invites coming up. But thank you all and have a pleasant evening.